Well, 2019 has been a big year in fashion, from new trends to an endless stream of controversies erupting online.
And after years of increased scrutiny, issues of sustainability and corporate social responsibility are slowly becoming industry norms. Here to discuss the biggest fashion news stories of the year and the past 10 years, we're joined now by fashion journalist Paddy Huntington. Paddy, good to see you.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in. Let's start with sustainability. We are seeing brands becoming more conscious of this, and I guess it makes good business sense because the rest of the population is becoming more aware of this as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been referred to as the new BAU, business as usual of the fashion industry. 10 years ago, I mean, there were certainly people, outliers in the industry, Stella McCartney, brands like Patagonia, that were very interested in their sort of environmental footprint, but it's really just accelerated to the point where it's a tectonic shift really in the industry. Of course, on the human rights labour front, I mean, the Rana Plaza tragedy in 2013 is something that really brought the industry, I mean, you couldn't ignore the labels in the rubble of the Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh, where over 1,000 people died and over 2,000 were injured, and that sped up things. But really, in the past few years, I mean, there's been just pact after pact, formed. We've got the United Nations Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action that was launched in December, a fashion pact that was launched before the G7, and there's still only 12.5% of the industry is committed to sort of sustainability goals, but it's better than nothing. And
I was going to ask you about that. Is it rhetoric more than practice? Because I mean, 10 years ago we also didn't have such incredibly cheap clothes from so many fast fashion outlets.
Exactly.
And that's got to have an unsustainable footprint.
And in talking about cheap labour, I mean, on the the living wage front, I mean, fast fashion has had to address a lot of things, including its disposability and the quality of its garments. But as the world continues to expand, the fashion world, and cheaper, countries keep coming online. Like Ethiopia now got the world's cheapest. I think it's $26 a month, which is in Bangladesh it's $97 a month, and in China it's something like $340 a month. So I mean, the companies, the governments, we want your business. We're cheaper than everyone else, but at what cost? So.
Yeah, the other thing we've seen change a lot over the last 10 years is diversity. We're seeing more of it.
Yeah, incredibly so. And it was always a major criticism of fashion that it was a kind of whiteout on the runways. But we've seen it on all fronts, not just racial diversity, which has dramatically increased over the past year, really. But, in terms of, gender fluidity and gender, I mean, Australia's Andrea Page, transgender models, I mean, led by Andrea in 2011, and in the body diversity issue as well. I mean, that there's less body diversity on the runways, but we're starting to see, I mean, we've talked about this on Weekend Breakfast, and it's always quite a controversial topic on social media because you've got the people saying, thank heavens the fashion industry is recognising us, and the rest who are saying you're normalising obesity. So, yeah, and in terms of racial diversity, I mean, 10 years ago, Australia's biggest models were the sort of blonde, blue-eyed beach babes like Gemma Ward, Abbey Lee Kershaw, or people like Miranda Kerr and Catherine McNeil, who were, with dark hair and fair skin. But now our biggest models are Sudanese Australians, topped by Urdu Dakesh. So it's really quite a dramatic turnaround.
You mentioned social media, and of course that is one of the, if not the biggest change over the past 10 years, and it's impacted fashion as well, in the sense that you used to just advertise on billboards and so on, and now the role of influencers and Instagram and so on, and not to mention all of the snafus and the bad press that you can get if you accidentally trigger a social media outrage campaign, has revolutionised the way that brands interface.
Well, the internet has obviously changed the world, but in terms of fashion, you're right. And I mean, the magazines have been some of the biggest victims because, before they were influencers, they were bloggers, but as soon as Instagram came around in 2010, I believe in its first couple of weeks in October 2010, it had 100,000 users. By December that year, so 2 months later, it had 1 million. Now it's got 1 billion users, and it really kind of democratised. It put the bloggers who were trying to monetise their blogs via third-party sort of sales agents and things, taking 30 or 50%, suddenly could start selling things. And I mean, and that has not obviously come without its own controversies about how ethical they're, whether or not they've disclosed that they're ads. But I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And I mean, you have the biggest ones, like the Kardashian-Jenner clan, with hundreds of millions of followers. And a couple of years ago, about 5 years ago, we talked about the first $1 million influencers earning $1 million a year. Kylie Jenner became the world's youngest self-made billionaire earlier this year. They came from reality TV, of course, but then leveraged that on social media.
Self-made with a grain of salt.
Of course. So I mean, it has been an extraordinary. And then that's right. The other side of that is that, citizens are now empowered and anything. I mean, and particularly this year, we've just seen a never-ending series of things. I mean, for example, the blackface controversy at Gucci with, now that show passed without much sort of, to do earlier in the year, but as soon as the images emerged online of the sort of the models in these balaclavas with the red lips, suddenly there was an outrage, and it's prompted a huge turnaround by the companies with diversity initiatives.
We've also seen over the past 10 years a bit of an explosion in menswear, and interestingly, the growth in menswear is outstripping womenswear. Menswear
has been probably one of, if not the biggest sort of fashion story of the past decade. I mean, it's really interesting. It was always there, much smaller than womenswear. It's becoming on par, and some say it may even eclipse womenswear sales, which is fascinating.
Do you mean in terms of the amount we spend on it?
Absolutely, yeah. In terms of the overall market, I mean, it's grown. The growth has been faster. There are companies like Christian Dior that have said that their menswear business is growing at twice the rate of womenswear. Because remember, womenswear is a mature market. We've had a new generation of male consumers. I mean, the millennials, obviously now Gen Z coming through, celebrities. I mean, and social media has also empowered them. So, I mean, it's been quite extraordinary.
Particularly sneakers.
Sneakers, yes, and sneakers. I mean, we saw this kind of obsessive behaviour with women, with things like it bags and waiting lists, and suddenly the sneaker became the it bag for men. Where, I mean, we've all seen the news footage of the kids doing campouts outside sneaker stores.
For very expensive.
Very expensive. I mean, sneakers are now traded like stocks.
Yeah.
It's an industry that's almost doubled over the past 3 years to $100 billion. It's quite extraordinary.
Just very quickly, Paddy, it would be remiss of us not to look at the past 10 years of fashion without also isolating one of the worst trends in fashion, which is wearing gym wear out.
No, it's so comfortable, Josh.
Athleisure wear.
Yeah. So
I feel so old. I was at the shopping centre just yesterday, and these three young, pretty somethings came along, dressed like
I think that was
it
me.
was yoga. No, it was like we were going into a yoga.
They probably were
yoga.
I mean, Lululemon, traditional yoga has just boomed over the past decade. I mean, it was added to the Merriam-Webster dictionary in 2016. The word. I think it's an inescapable force. I mean, certainly fashion tailoring has come back on the runways, but athleisure, I think, is here to stay. It's comfortable. It's generally less expensive, and I mean, if you can add that with going to the gym and keeping healthy.
So versatile. Fantastic. Here to stay. Thanks, Paddy. Good to see you again.
My pleasure.
Thanks,
see
Paddy.
you in the next 10 years and see what fashion brings then.
See you in a month to talk about menswear again.
Fantastic.
See you then. Thanks.